Tonight on Reporting Scotland. The First Minister says a hard Brexit deal will cost Scotland over £12 billion a year. The Conservatives say that's over-the-top scaremongering. Nearly 500 planned operations were cancelled last week due to winter pressures on the NHS.
As a nurse, you do sometimes feel overwhelmed. Just very high volume of people coming in, people in trolleys and corridors, people in chairs in corridors. And obviously the staff are working really hard to make sure patients are safe.
Also in the programme, Glasgow Airport proposes new flight paths to cope with more passengers. What do nearby residents think? Going to pot. Following a big increase in complaints about potholes, we ask what is being done. And after encouraging performances in the autumn tests, could an injury crisis dent Scotland's chances in the Six Nations? Good evening. What would be the impact on Scotland of a so-called hard Brexit? Well, today the Scottish Government unveiled its own analysis and claimed that leaving the EU with no trade deals could eventually see more than £12 billion wiped off the economy. However, the Scottish Conservatives described that figure as completely over-the-top scaremongering. The analysis also dealt with immigration and called for the continued free movement of people. Here's our political editor, Brian Taylor.
Welcome to Crieff Hydro, an oasis of placid calm. But the boss here is anxious.
So, full tonight?
He depends heavily on EU migrant staff and worries that Brexit might cause obstacles in future.
Put simply, we'd be in trouble. We're reliant on something like 1 in 5 people who work in our company to come from Europe, and we want these folk to feel welcome when they come to Scotland and work hard for us, and they want to work hard for us.
In the Hydro's cafe, Robert Borzagi, a Romanian. He's worked in Scotland for 9 years. He loves it here, but Brexit has him worried too.
Thinking of your future, you're not too sure anymore. I have gone ahead and applied for the citizenship right now, just to be on the safe side. Because, they said if you go out of the union, nobody knows what your rights is going to be.
Nicola Sturgeon campaigned to remain in the European Union. She says she's trying to reduce the damage done. So, accept for now that Britain is leaving the EU. The question is how. Could the UK stay in the European single market like Norway? That means the free movement of goods, services, capital and people. Or could the Prime Minister reach a Canada-style trade deal with the EU, removing tariffs on most goods? Today's Scottish paper examines 3 scenarios for leaving the EU. It says that maintaining membership of the European single market would still reduce Scotland's overall economy by £4 billion by 2030. A Canada-style free trade agreement with Europe would cut the economy by £9 billion. Worst of all, according to the Scottish Government, is leaving with no deal and resorting to World Trade Organisation rules. That would cost Scotland £12.7 billion a year.
So it's clear from these figures that staying in the single market does not insulate us from the costs of leaving the EU, but it will minimise those costs. The weight of evidence in favour of staying in the single market is compelling, and I believe that there is a majority there to be harnessed that can achieve at least that outcome.
The UK government sees today's paper as unhelpful.
Anybody can make end of the world type predictions, but rather than focusing on the most negative scenario, what we should be doing is working together to get the best possible deal, a deal that allows us barrier, tariff-free access to European markets, but also allows us to take advantage of the many opportunities that Brexit can bring with other markets around the world.
Back in Crieff, they're listening as the Tories segue smoothly into warning against Scottish independence. Nicola Sturgeon says that's a future option, while Brexit is an immediate threat.
Well, we'll be speaking to our Westminster correspondent David Porter in just a moment, but first our political editor Brian Taylor is at Holyrood for us this evening. Brian, as we heard from Nicola Sturgeon, the point of this analysis is to reaffirm her hopes to stay in the single market. Is there any likelihood of this?
It's a tough one, Jackie. I mean, of course, Nicola Sturgeon wants to stay in the European Union as an independent
Scottish nation. But you're right, the objective in this paper here, setting out, is membership of the single market. She wants to assemble popular support for that, business support for that. But in practice, if it's going to happen, it has to be political support here at Holyrood and above all at Westminster. And it'll have to be a cross-party if it is to work at all. The Liberal Democrats are on board for that. But the Conservatives, the Prime Minister says no. She set her face against membership of the single market. Why so? Because it involves free movement of people, otherwise known as immigration. And that's one of the principal reasons that many people voted against membership of the European Union in the first place. As for Labour, they castigate the Conservative approach. They say they are in favour of jobs, but they are not convinced. They are not currently advocating membership of the single market. They talk about access, and they say that the Conservative approach is damaging to jobs and to workers' rights, but they have yet to be convinced that it has to be stressed by membership of the single market.
Well, let's go to David Porter now. Thank you, Brian. David, what's been the reaction to this at Westminster, and will it have any impact at all on the EU negotiations?
Well, Jackie, as so often down here, the tone of the reaction depends how you stand on Brexit in the first place. I think it's fair to say that those who were on the Remain side wanted to stay within the European Union will regard what the Scottish Government has produced as a useful document. It will show in black and white and pounds, shillings and pence what Brexit could mean. Those on the other side of the argument, those who always wanted to leave the European Union, say this is in effect Nicola Sturgeon's own version of Project Fear, referring back to documents put out by the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, when he was Chancellor in the EU referendum debate, saying basically that it was all going to be horrible when Brexit came about. They say that Nicola Sturgeon is doing what George Osborne did a couple of years ago. I think it is fair to say, though, from the UK government's perspective, that they regard this document as unhelpful. They say it will not be helpful when the UK embarks on the second round of negotiations with the EU countries to have a constituent part of the UK making one argument, although they do say that Theresa May has always made it perfectly clear that she will be negotiating on behalf of the whole of the UK, not one single part of the UK. They also raise a further point. They say that this document almost concentrates on Scotland's relationship with the EU, when in economic terms, the really important relationship is between Scotland and the rest of the UK, not the EU.
David Porter and Brian Taylor, thank you. The collapse of the construction giant Carillion should not affect the cost or timescale of its Scottish contracts, including the new Aberdeen bypass. Well, that assurance came from the Economy Secretary, Keith Brown. But thousands of jobs are at risk across the UK as a result of the company failure. Our business correspondent David Henderson reports.
A brand new road, a bypass for Aberdeen that's meant to be finished in a matter of months. But those plans are being hastily rearranged after the collapse of one of the main contractors. The government insists the demise of Carillion shouldn't blow this project off course.
We don't believe it should. The Aberdeen Western Peripheral route, the basis for that contract is one where the three contractors are jointly and severally liable to finish the contract. So the two remaining contractors now take on that obligation, and they will see through this contract.
Few companies you've barely heard of have quite as much influence as Carillion. That's because it's picked up all sorts of public sector work, like providing staff to this Glasgow hospital and helping electrify the rail network through the Central Belt. Carillion's involved in major building projects, but the company has its fingers in many other pies too. It's been responsible for maintaining more than 80 military sites for the Ministry of Defence in Scotland. Now the company's gone bust, all that work will have to be reorganised and fast. All quiet at Carillion's Edinburgh office today. The company's collapsed, owing £1.5 billion. But this former subcontractor, who did work for Carillion, told me at times they were shambolic.
We would be asked to attend sites that were sometimes considerable distances away from where we were operating. We would travel to those sites only to discover that the job had either been done or that the site itself had been closed down, sometimes 2 years previous.
Closed down?
Yeah, so we would travel to places like Thurso, arrive there to discover that the branch of that particular bank had closed down 2 years previous, but we were still being sent to do work at it.
Edinburgh's Waverley Station, where Carillion's been extending platforms. Its workforce here and elsewhere now look to an uncertain future.
This, I believe, is an example of the obsession by governments at Scottish level, Westminster level, and even at local authority level, that the private sector is best and everything should go out to tender to the private sector. And we can see now the consequences when that happens.
So a scramble to deal with Carillion's collapse as hundreds of jobs are set to be lost. This giant firm was meant to be too big to fail, but we've learnt now it wasn't. David Henderson, reporting Scotland.
Hundreds of jobs are to be created with the construction of an oil production vessel in the North Sea. Shell say up to 400 workers would be needed for the project in the Penguins field, 50 miles from the Brent development. Once operational, there are expected to be about 70 jobs on board. As winter pressures continue to put a strain on the NHS, the BBC can reveal hospitals across Scotland had to cancel nearly 500 non-urgent operations last week. The Health Secretary says some patients may have to wait longer for routine procedures and outpatient appointments. Here's our Health and Social Care correspondent, Shelley Joffrey.
That's a good start to the week.
The Health Secretary at Monklands Hospital this morning, thanking staff for their hard work.
I'll go and have a quick look to make sure there's no infection.
In her 20 years' experience, Louise Das has never seen anything like the last few weeks.
As a nurse, you do sometimes feel overwhelmed. Just very high volume of people coming in, people in trolleys and corridors, people in chairs and corridors. And obviously the staff are working really hard to make sure patients are safe at all times. But it is difficult when patients are in a corridor and you're not able to keep a close eye on them at that time.
This hospital has long been one of the best performing in Scotland, but even here the last few weeks have been a struggle. They had to open 2 additional wards worth of beds just to cope with the surge in demand.
It's been exceptionally difficult, very busy. I think I would say that the entire hospital has been under a considerable amount of stress, and everyone sees the emergency department as the front line of the hospital, but that only reflects the difficulties and problems that the rest of the hospital has been under. The whole hospital has pulled together very much as a team to try and overcome the difficulties that we've been facing.
In Scotland, there's been no blanket suspension of routine operations, as there has been down south. But last week, nearly 500 procedures were postponed across the country, which won't help with waits already going in the wrong direction.
What I want to see is the figures beginning to go in the right direction, but it is a challenging time, particularly at the back of a difficult winter. That will have an impact on operations and procedures, on outpatient appointments, and you know, we'll need to see how that manages its way through the system.
In the short term, though, all eyes are on tomorrow's weekly A&E performance figures, which the Health Secretary expects to remain challenging. Shelley Joffrey, reporting Scotland, Airdrie.
An investigation into claims that 7 police officers had acted improperly while trying to discover if there'd been a leak of information about a high-profile murder inquiry has found there was no misconduct. The investigation followed a report highly critical of Police Scotland for unlawful surveillance. Our Home Affairs correspondent Reba Alderson reports.
This complex story dates back to 2005 when 27-year-old Emma Caldwell, who'd been working as a prostitute in Glasgow, was found dead. Her body was found in a Lanarkshire forest and no one's ever been charged with her murder. 10 years after her death, police reopened the case. But detectives in the now disbanded Police Counter-Corruption Unit believed information was being leaked to a BBC documentary maker and intercepted communications from the people they thought were doing it, 2 serving and 2 retired officers. They complained and the case was investigated by the Interception of Communications Commissioner IOCO. In a report in November 2015, it said proper approval hadn't been sought for the surveillance and called the police action reckless. In July the next year, Durham Constabulary began a separate inquiry to see if there had been any criminality. It concluded the law had not been broken. Today, a third investigation by the Police Service of Northern Ireland said the 7 officers it was investigating hadn't broken police regulations. There'd been no misconduct. They've now been returned to normal duties. Police Scotland has already apologised to the 4 people whose data was under surveillance and says a detailed action plan is in place to improve its procedures. Last year, police revisited the woods near Biggar where Emma's body was found and later said they'd found new evidence, but so far there's still been no arrest. And police say despite all of the investigations into their own behaviour, they'll do everything they can to bring her killer to justice. Revel Alderson reporting, Scotland.
Police are warning the public not to approach a prisoner who's absconded from Castle Huntly Open Jail near Dundee. 44-year-old Paul Stewart, who was on home leave, was reported missing this afternoon. Glasgow Airport has announced plans to change its flight paths, saying the current routes are no longer fit for purpose. Airport bosses say the proposals will help meet increasing demand for flights and cut the impact to people who live under them. But opponents say those claims are ludicrous. Andrew Black can tell us more.
In Clydebank, low-flying planes are a regular sight. The town lies under one of Glasgow Airport's flight paths. Residents here just try to get on with it.
At first, when I just came to live here, yes. But then you get used to it because I've been here 30 years.
I think the kids enjoy it because you see the planes flying by all the time, so they're happy with it.
See, when you're watching the telly, a good bit will come and then a plane will go over and you won't hear anything.
Glasgow Airport's dealing with increasing passenger numbers and congestion in the skies. Airport bosses say the answer is to scrap its 50-year-old flight paths and replace them with new ones. The plan also involves getting rid of this outdated ground-based navigation system in favour of satellites. Management say all this means expansion can take place while cutting CO2 emissions and limiting disruption to local communities.
We do recognise that noise is a concern for local communities. We have given great consideration to how we've plotted the proposed flight paths.
But the Greens say that's ludicrous.
This means more air pollution, more noise pollution, more of a contribution towards climate change. No one's taking the airport seriously when they say that more flights is going to reduce emissions.
The Future Airspace Strategy has been designed.
This change isn't just happening in Glasgow, it's all part of a wider push to modernise aviation across the UK. A recent attempt to redraw Edinburgh Airport's flight paths met with local opposition, but Glasgow Airport officials say there'll be no changes until everyone's had a say. Andrew Black, reporting, Scotland.
It's almost 12 minutes to 7, a reminder of tonight's main story. The First Minister says a hard Brexit deal will cost Scotland over £12 billion a year. The Conservatives say that's over-the-top scaremongering. And still to come, the Team Scotland athlete who was inspired to pick up a new sport after a day out at the Glasgow Commonwealth Games. If you think the potholes on our roads are getting worse, well, you're right. Several councils say they're having to fill in more and more. In Glasgow alone, the number has quadrupled. They cost millions each year to repair. But could potholes become less of a problem if more was spent keeping the roads in a better condition to begin with? Here's our local government correspondent, Jamie McIver.
Potholes always drive motorists mad. But the recent cold weather means there are more of them. In Glasgow alone, 600 were reported in the first week of January, 4 times the figure for the same week last year, and a disappointment after years of improvements.
In the last couple of years, we'd maybe have 3 or 4 patching squads out every day. This year we're going to have 15 until we catch every single pothole, and thereafter we'll have resurfacing squads out to resurface whole roads.
The reason there are more potholes in many areas this year is simple. It's the cold weather. Water on the road turns to ice, and that in turn can cause the surface to crack. The amount spent repairing potholes varies year on year, but it's big. Last year, Glasgow spent 4.6 million, Fife 3.2 million, and the Borders 3.3 million. But could repair bills across Scotland be cut dramatically if there was more work to actually improve roads and make potholes less likely?
The savings have to be longer term. We need a long-term plan here because we do have at least £1 billion backlog of road maintenance in Scotland, and that's an official figure from COSLA. So basically we need to be looking at a long-term plan to actually stop the use of patching, because patching doesn't work. It's a waste of money because the patches inevitably in the Scottish weather are raised up and become potholes again very shortly.
Many councils argue roads are improving, while Shetland says the amount they spend repairing potholes is minimal. Here's why.
Shetland spent a significant amount of money during the late 70s and early 80s upgrading the network. That, coupled with low traffic volumes and in particular low heavy goods vehicle movements.
The trouble is, improving more roads nationally would be a big investment. Savings would take years. But the cold snap means potholes are an immediate problem. Jamie McIver, reporting Scotland.
Sport now, and tomorrow the Scotland rugby coach will announce his squad for the Six Nations. The championship starts in just under 3 weeks and the Scots have high hopes. But as Andy Burke reports, injuries have left Gregor Townsend with selection problems.
Scotland fans looking for reasons to be optimistic about this season's Six Nations need only cast their minds back to November. A victory over Samoa, a narrow loss to world champions New Zealand, and this record win over Australia represented significant progress. And so hopes are high that Scotland can finally mount a serious title challenge this time around. Gregor Townsend names his Scotland squad here at Murrayfield tomorrow. But ahead of the Six Nations opener in Wales on February the 3rd, he has a number of injury concerns to consider, not least in the front row. At Loosehead, Alistair Dickinson and Alan Dell are out with long-term injuries, while their Edinburgh teammate Daryl Marfo, who came to the fore in the autumn, looks highly likely to miss the Wales match with a back problem. At Tighthead, WP Nell could miss the entire tournament with a fractured arm. His deputy, Glasgow Warriors Xander Fagerson, is out with a foot injury, while Simon Bergen is suspended for the Six Nations opener. Hooker Ross Ford is another long-term casualty, while Fraser Brown's availability is unclear after several head injuries this season.
You can do a lot from scrum attack, and if you haven't got a solid scrum, then that can really diminish your go forward, your front foot ball. So whoever plays is going to be under real pressure.
I guess that's the challenge for Scotland. You've even got a couple of club sides supplying the majority of the team, and likewise for the clubs, when you get injuries, you tend to lose an extra person who has to go to Scotland to cover your injured player. So, certainly we reckon there'll be a number of our boys who will be back over the next couple of weeks, and that'll help alleviate things.
Among those is Scotland's talisman Stuart Hogg, who should return from injury to play his part in Cardiff. Andy Burke, reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
Well, staying with sport, it's been an unusual route for one member of Team Scotland heading for the Commonwealth Games in Australia. Jodie Hughes grew up in Canada, where she tried out for the Olympic ice hockey team. But 12 years ago, she came to Scotland to be married. And a day at the Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games gave her a new sporting focus. Rona McLeod can tell us more.
This is Jodie Hughes. She's 5'1" and lifting 75 kilos. That's just under 12 stones. Another impressive statistic, she's only been weightlifting for 3 years, inspired by the sport at Glasgow 2014.
Sitting in Glasgow watching the girls lift at the Commonwealth Games was incredible. They're so strong, so inspirational, and I was just amazed by they can go out there and be so brave.
At that point, did you think at all, oh, maybe I could do this?
Absolutely not. I never thought I'd be in a position to be at the Commonwealth Games. I mean, I didn't even touch a barbell till I was well into my 30s.
She started only 3 years ago as a CrossFit athlete here at East Kilbride, and she quite liked the weightlifting and wanted to try out. So over the last 3 years, she's been working very hard, very determined to try and get to the Commonwealth Games. So she's managed to make that goal.
But this is not Hughes' first sporting challenge. As a teenager in Canada, she was the only girl in her ice hockey team.
I'd go home from practice in tears because I wasn't accepted by not only my fellow teammates but from the parents as well. But I pushed through it, and I think it's taught me a really strong life lesson. I worked really hard, persevered, and it led to me being scouted for the first women's Olympic team in Nagano, Japan.
So what are her chances of success in the Gold Coast?
There are no A and B groups, it's straight into a final. So although it will be very difficult for her to get a medal, I think she'll do very well. Anything is possible.
You know, being part of Team Scotland, it's a dream. It makes me really emotional, actually. I can't wait for that. We're the first team out. It's just going to be amazing. I just can't wait.
Excitement for the Gold Coast Games. Hugh's latest challenge will be here in the blink of an eye. Rhona McLeod, reporting Scotland.
Incredible. Now, let's get the weather from Christopher, and it includes something called thunder snow.
Thunder snow indeed, yes, Jackie, thank you very much indeed. Hello there, more on that in a second, because the week ahead is really quite wintry. We have a Met Office yellow be aware warning in force for the risk of snow and ice until at least Wednesday morning, because we've got cold Arctic air, frequent showers, and most of these showers falling as snow inland away from the coast. Around the coast, more like rain or sleet, and we could well see some difficult conditions where they occur. Further east and northeast, dry actually, but still cold, frosty and icy. So tomorrow, it's going to be a wintry day, a windy day, a cold day, and those showers, once again, falling as snow to all levels pretty much, but they are showers. Not everyone's going to see the same amount of snow. In fact, some may escape with hardly anything at all. Others, significant accumulations, especially on higher road routes with drifting possible. So a cold afternoon, a wintry afternoon, those snow showers continuing to come further east, but towards parts of eastern Angus, in towards Aberdeenshire, probably reasonably dry for you and bright at times too. The heaviest of those showers come with the risk of thunder, snow. Really, it's just a thunderstorm with snow falling out of the sky rather than rain, and perhaps some hail in the mix. There is the potential for some interruptions to power supply where they occur. Not an extensive risk of power cuts, but something to bear in mind, certainly across the Highlands and Islands. Then tomorrow evening and tomorrow night, further snow showers, banding together at times, difficult conditions on the roads. If the commute to work tomorrow is OK, it doesn't mean the commute home will be. It could go downhill. Midweek, we've still got a cold west-northwesterly, further snow showers, and this feature developing for Wednesday night. But for Wednesday day, well, more of the same really. Some sunshine, mainly in the east and northeast, and frequent wintry showers. Again, difficult conditions on the roads. Another cold day, temperatures 3-4 Celsius at best. Add on the wind, really quite a bitter feel. And then Wednesday night, there's that interesting feature, a rapidly deepening storm approaching our shores. To the north of it, a bout of heavy snow. To the south of it, gale force conditions and heavy rain. But its exact position could be a little further north, a little further south. We'll keep you posted. It clears through quite quickly on Thursday, and we're back to a cold northwesterly with further wintry showers at times. That's the forecast for now.
Oh, what joy, Christopher. Thank you. And that's all from Reporting Scotland. From all the team, have a good evening. Bye-bye.